So in working with HTML forms like we have in the last few videos, we've seen a variety of different types of inputs using the input tag and then the select tag for if we need to limit the options. And limiting the options is something that's very helpful to make sure we get the right data. A good example is with our department. You might have various different departments, and for example, you might be looking for administration. Some people will type in admin, some people type administration, some people might spell it wrong because it's kind of a long word, and you'll find that within a lot of different groups. So I worked in a department called training and development, and that was the official title, although everyone called it T&D, and it was just the first sounding initials in each of those words. And so it just matters of how you want to make sure that your data is consistent. That drop down menu that we showed you before was great if you have a lot of different options. An example we talked about that where it works really well is if you want to list one of the states, and then you have 50 states plus you have territories, or if you want to list one of the countries that you support and you've got over 200 countries in the world, you can use a drop down list, and if you make it alphabetical, a lot of times people can start typing and drop to there automatically. However, if you only have a couple of options, there are better ways. And so we're going to look at radio buttons and then checkboxes to see how we're going to do that. So I'm going to come over here into my HTML page real quick. Let's say as part of this form that we're asking our employees, we want to ask how do they want to be paid. And so I'm going to create a label, but I'm not going to attach this to anything just yet. And you'll see why. So we're going to ask people how do they want to be paid, and then we're going to give them some options. And this is one place where I do actually like to use the label and not the for tag. First, I have the label here, and it's not attached to anything because we're just letting people know, and if I style my labels a certain way, it keeps it consistent. But now I'm going to put a label associated with a radio button. And so I'm going to specify label, and I'm going to put it like this, and I'm going to put my radio button before my label. And I once again am going to use the input tag. You might think, well, why are you using the input tag? That created that little box that you could type things in. And sure, we could limit it to things like a number or a range or something like that. Well, if I look at the type, one of the options in here is for radio, and that is going to create a radio button. I'm going to give it a name, and my name is going to be pay type. I'm going to give it a value, and the value I'm going to give in this case is monthly. And then I'm going to close this, and then the next part of my label is going to be monthly. Now I'm going to show you what this looks like real quick so you can just kind of see this in action, and then you get an idea of how we're going to use this. So I'm going to go back to my HTML form, reload this, and notice I have a how do you want to be paid. I have a monthly option. If I click on monthly, it selects it for me, and that's what I'm looking for. I could also click on the little radio button, but by using the label, I can click on anything inside that label, which includes my input tag as well as the label, and it's going to be associated and select that option. Huge benefit for me. Now you might go, well, why did I do it like this? Well, a lot of times we see the radio button before the text that is associated with the radio button. And by putting that whole label around it, it just makes it a little bit easier for me. Now I'm going to come over here, and on my next slide, I'm going to do the same type thing. I'm going to create a label, and I'm going to put an input tag. We'll once again use type, radio, and now you're probably going to ask, okay, well, what are you going to do for the name? Well, for the radio button, I'm going to use the exact same name, pay type. And you might think, well, why are you doing that? Your name for the monthly was pay type, and now for whatever this value is going to be, it's going to be pay type. Why are you doing that? Well, in an HTML form, it looks for the name and will only allow one value with that same name to be selected. And so if I go and say pay type and I have 3 or 4 different pay types, only one of those options will be selected. That's exactly what I'm looking for. So I'm going to give this a new value, and I'm going to say semi-monthly. And I'm going to create just a couple more options. Okay, so you can see this. All my names are the same. They all have different values. We'll talk about that in just 1 second. And all the labels are different. Come back to my page, reload this. You see all my options. I click on monthly. I'm going to click on the little radio dot button for semi-monthly. Notice that now monthly is no longer selected. Semi-monthly is. I can select weekly, bi-weekly. I can click on the labels. Doesn't matter. You can see like that. Now, you might be saying, okay, I understand that they have to have the same name in order to be selected. If I change one little thing in the name, then I can have 2 options from the same group selected. I'm going to avoid that, so I'm going to make sure I have the same name. You'll notice I'm not using the ID, and in this case, I'm probably not going to be selecting by ID. I'm probably not going to be doing some JavaScript or CSS that's that specific, but I can if I need to. My IDs do have to be unique, and so I would make sure I do something to ensure that they are unique if that does happen. And I do wind up using an ID. Now, the reason for the value is if it's selected and you submit your form, whatever is inside value is what's going to be sent to the form processor. So that has to be filled out if you have a radio button. If you do not put anything there, it does not look at the label. It just sends blank data. So make sure that you have a value selected. So let's say I want to choose semi-monthly as my default value. Well, I'm going to add a new attribute, and this attribute is a Boolean attribute, just like we saw before with selected. However, it is going to be checked. So in this case, checked is our Boolean attribute. Yes, I know it's different than the selected in our select tag, but it is the way it is. Go back to my sample web page. Reload it. Notice that semi-monthly comes up. If I come in here and reload or launch again from scratch, semi-monthly is our default value. That's the one that gets selected for us. So that's a great way to have a default value once if I want to have a default value. Now, the other great thing about this is the fact that if you only have 3 to 5 options, a radio button is a great way to use it. It's a little bit more user-friendly than a drop-down menu. Drop-down menus are great if you have 20, 30, 50, 100 items. Radio buttons, you wouldn't want to go through all those options. But the radio button is just fine if you've got 2, 3, 4, 5 options. And so it's all a matter of picking the right option. Next up, we'll look at checkboxes.